Venus and Mars Encountering Earth by Language by Hajar. As social structures are undergoing some variations, differences in language use due to difference in gender might be experiencing variations as well. The study of the effect of gender on language dates back as early as 1915. Sapir reported an anthropological research on sex differences in language and labeled female language as abnormal. Jefferson hypothesized sex differences in English usage, and like Sapir considered these differences as indicative of feminine weakness. By far, the most complete analysis has been proposed by Robin Lakoff. She discusses 6 characteristics of women's speech. The first is lexical choice. Certain words are used exclusively by women, like Sumerian women who had a special language distinct from main language, which was spoken by both genders. Second is the use of empty adjectives, such as cute and divine. Not only are these adjectives meaningless, but in contrast to male adjectives like great and terrific, they are noticeably devoid of any connotations of power. Third is the use of question intonation in conjunction with declaratives. Tag questions, for instance, she's a nice person, isn't she? Allow women to make a statement without making an assertion. In addition to using tag questions, women often pronounce declarative statements with a rising intonation. These statements are most frequently made in response to a direct question, as in the interchange, when will you come? Oh, I'll come about 8 o'clock. Fourth is the frequent use of modifiers or hedges. The term hedge refers to a class of devices that supposedly soften utterances by signaling imprecision and non-commitment. Examples include pragmatic particles like about, sort of, and modal terms, possibly and perhaps, which again decreases the assertiveness of commitment involved in any statement. Fifth is the intensive use of the word so. And finally, the last one is the hypercorrect and polite grammar. Lakoff based her original argument mainly on personal observation and hypothetical examples. Despite some researchers being disagree on the existence of such a significant difference, in at least some of these respects, there is an increasing consensus that sex, like social class or subcultural group, is a variable which strongly affects speech. Much of the studies on the effect of gender on language, including the one by Lakoff, have dealt with the spoken language, with a limited number of researchers on written language, and they came up with the result that there is a parallel between the writing and speaking behaviors of the two sexes in terms of subject chosen and the content. Johnson and Murachwer investigated the role of gender in New Zealand literature across periods and styles. They found that more than 1/3 of the linguistic variables coded for in the literature varied on the basis of author gender. Additionally, the gender effect was greater for authors writing in early period than the contemporary period. Finally, they concluded that although results show that gender is not the only factor influencing language use, the role of gender in professional literature is robust. Some researchers have speculated about the social and psychological implementations of the observed sex-preferred differentiation in a spoken language. 2 main approaches exist to account for such a difference. First is the dominance approach, in which it is proposed that the difference is a consequence of male dominance and regarding women as suppressed minority group. And the second is a difference approach, whereby women use a different language because they belong to a different subculture. Hence, the difference in language can be attributed to cultural differences. It might be due to differences in the way women are brought up. As sex-exclusive differentiation now seems to be less conspicuous than before and women are less likely to be regarded as a suppressed minority, it has been tried to find out whether the patterns of language usage has changed dramatically during the last 2 centuries or not. It might be useful for determining which approach can best account for the difference in the language used by the 2 genders. The present study aims at investigating the written mode to find any probable difference due to gender and detect the areas of difference, keeping an eye on the Lakoff hypothesis. Hence, 60 English short stories with British or American authors were selected, 30 of which had female authors and 30 male authors, making four major categories of 19th and 20th centuries, male and female. The investigated features include empty adjectives, boosters, and intensifiers that were inspected using the wordsmith tools. As can be seen from the table, the most recurring indicator is very as an intensifier in both genders. Some other words have never been applied in the intended sense, like moderately as intensifier. This is also the case for 20th century. As can be seen from table 3, women exceed men in the application of all of the features except boosters of the 20th century. The most conspicuous difference between the two genders is in the area of intensifier in both centuries. In fact, for intensifiers there are more indicators than the other two, and most of them are applied much more than other indicators of other categories. The least noticeable difference is in boosters, which is even negative in 20th century. This means that men use it more than women. The result of this paper demonstrates some degree of difference in language used by men and women. However, the difference in the language used by each gender tended to minimize, as is also demonstrated by Johnson and Molchaver. This might be attributed to the change in women's role in society. As they have gained an increasing role in social activities outside home, the language is no more restricted to home interactions. Needless to say, this social intermingling might equally affect men's language. This is in line with Turgell's assertion that the larger and more inflexible the difference between social roles of women and men in a particular community, the larger and more rigid the linguistic behavior differences tend to be. To sum it up, the present paper supports and adds a bit to Holmes' claim that the emerging picture of women's speech is far more encouraging than the one which viewed them as anxiety-ridden beings, afraid to assert their views in both oral and written interaction. A placid and light landing on Earth.